G'day everybody, welcome to the FightFit Podcast. We have got Barry Michael on the podcast today, former world champ, and I'm absolutely thrilled to have you on, mate. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Jake. Pleasure to be here, mate.
Still pinching myself a little bit after I've watched your documentaries and everything to have the great man himself on the podcast.
Thank you, mate. Yeah, the documentary for your listeners out there is called A Melbourne Story, and it was done by Nick Butler from Bright Star Media, and he did a fabulous job on the documentary about Lester and I and about the whole scenario sort of thing.
Yeah, I absolutely loved it, mate. It was such a good doco. So what are you up to at the moment, mate? What are you up to these days?
We'll just come from the gym with my oldest boy, Zach. We just had a bit of a workout, but working in with a Chinese group that I do some business with, hopefully to start promoting some fights out of China. Looks like the first one could be in Shanghai. The date they've given me is the 16th of October. Spoke to Brian Armatruder today, and possibly Zach Dunn could fight the main event over there against the number one Chinese. I can't think of his name; it's probably a little bit unpronounceable, but they seem very keen. And Fox Sports Australia main event look fairly keen to get behind it. But they're telling me they want a 5-year contract and 4 to 5 fights a year. So if it happens, Jake, it'll be great for Australian boxing.
Yeah, and how do you see Australian boxing at the moment? How do you see the current climate?
I think it's probably in the healthiest it's been for 15 years or maybe more. I think we've got so many good up-and-comers, and I won't name everyone because I'll miss people, but there's a lot of great prospects in Australia at the moment and a lot of good local fights coming up. I mean, we just had Dwight Ritchie and Tim Zhu, and now we've got
and that was a
really good fight, quality fight and quality match-up and a quality undercard. And now we've got Jeff Horn and Zarafa, which is another great contest, local fighters. Without bringing imports in that really aren't up to the task. 2 world-rated, world-class fighters. Jeff Horn, obviously a legend after beating one of the greatest ever in Manny Pacquiao, which when he beat Manny Pacquiao, I told everybody he had the style to beat Pacquiao. And, perfect timing.
He manhandled him. He
manhandled him.
Yeah.
He fought the perfect fight. Well, Manny's...
But the commentators were so biased against him, I thought.
No, I was one of the commentators. We had him actually winning the fight.
Yeah.
Since then, every other commentator, it started off with Teddy Atlas. Atlas said he was blatantly robbed, and then Lennox Lewis that Manny was blatantly robbed. After the fight, Manny was humble, accepted the loss, but within 2 days, the world, the fact that an unknown Australian had beaten the great Manny Pacquiao. And you know what? As Manny Pacquiao tried to enforce the rematch clause that he had, because there was a mandatory rematch clause, he's never wanted the rematch. And I'm not saying Manny wouldn't win in a rematch, because Manny's shown some incredible form since. But at the time, Jeff Horn was on a roll. He was fight fit. He's strong, aggressive. He's got power. And he's unpredictable, and I just knew that he had the right style to upset Manny. In a rematch could be different, who knows, but Manny's never wanted the rematch.
I found it strange that there are a lot of people calling out saying that Manny was robbed.
Manny wasn't robbed. He wasn't robbed at all. It went to the WBO. I think they had a dozen judges sit and watch it, because there was a lot of stuff happen afterwards. And I think 10 out of the 12, I can't remember how many exactly, but it was a large majority of the judges had Jeff Horn winning. So to still keep reading about how the great Manny Pacquiao was robbed blindly in Australia, it really sort of hurts me, and it sickens me a bit that they're still saying that stuff. Jeff Horn won fair and square, and one of the greatest victories for any Australian boxer ever.
I think it's goes to show how underrated Jeff Horn is as well a little bit.
Well, I tell you, I saw Jeff Horn early doors. I think it was his 4th fight. I love Samuel Colomban. He probably heard me talk about this half a dozen times, but I asked Jake Carr, who I was promoting at the time, and Zach Dunn, both very good fighters.
And Zach Dunn, of course, yeah.
Two guns, and I asked them both, because they both trained with Jeff Horn at the Australian Institute of Sport. I said, how will Sam Colomban go against Jeff Horn, or vice versa? And they both said Jeff Horn knocked Sam Colomban out. And I said, Sam Colomban doesn't get knocked out. And you know what? Since then, he's never been knocked out. He's fought for the Commonwealth title. He's fought 12 rounders. He's fought world-class fighters. He's never been knocked out. 1 minute into the first round, Jeff Horn hit him with a right hand. Sam was asleep. The fight was he was counted out. The fight was over. Jeff Horn was celebrating, and Sam jumped up. He didn't even know the fight had started. So it was an incredible clean knockout, and that's ever since then I've known that Jeff Horn was something special. Okay. To do that to Sam Collinban, because as I said, Sam's a one tough cookie and a ripper bloke and a quality fighter.
So Jeff Horn obviously went and fought Crawford after that, which was just a massive fight, and the next level of sort of caliber of opponent after that.
Yeah.
How did you see that fight playing out? And
well,
to plan?
I went over to Vegas with Eddie Maguire and Paul Kenton and covered the fight. And to be honest with you, I was aware of a lot of things, that Jeff Horn was seriously struggling with the weight. Crawford is one of the greatest talents I've ever seen, and hadn't watched that much of him until I got in my room in Vegas, and I watched quite a bit of his fights, and I thought, my God, this is going to be a very difficult job indeed. But to be honest with you, it's always tough when you're fighting out of town, you're in a foreign country. Crawford was basically in his element, and when you walked into the MGM Grand, it was Jeff Horn was the champion. There was massive sign up, Crawford and versus Horn. As Crawford was the champion, should have been the other way round. Crawford was given a 3-level penthouse with saunas and gym and all that sort of stuff, and Jeff Horn was with his wife and brand new baby in a suite, the same as I had. Look, he struggled with the weight. The final straw for me was at the weigh-in the day before the fight. Jeff Horn came in, I don't know, whatever, hundreds of grams over, 300 or 400 grams over, pound or so. And 3 other fighters, Jeff Horn said he'd weighed on 2 calibrated sets of scales and was under the weight. 3 other fighters that thought they were underweight weighed over the weight. So what happened there? So that was the.
So you think it might have been something untoward?
Well, I just think he was psychologically half beaten by the time he got in the ring, and then he gets in the ring with a guy that's got incredible speed and power. And look, I'm not saying Jeff could have beaten Crawford. I'm pretty sure he would have, done a better job. But again, having to go and take off weight before the weigh-in, and the psychological side of the battle is a big part of it. And look, personally with me, if I had been looking after Jeff Horn, it's easy to say that now, but I did say it to other people, I would have moved him up in weight, vacated the title. Bob Arum paid him $2.5 million US to lose to Crawford, to lose his title. But Bob Arum would have probably paid him a minimum $500K to stand aside, because he could have matched 2 of his own fighters, Errol Spence or someone like that, against Crawford. And
I don't think Errol Spence wants that fight just yet. But,
well, I'm just saying, Jay, he could have matched him against one of his own other fighters, and he would have got a far bigger crowd, far bigger pay-per-view, because Jeff's a relative unknown. And also there was the issue about the horsehair gloves. I mean, I got flown to Sydney to discuss it with Johnny Lewis, myself, and Jeff and Glenn Rushton about whether they should fight in horsehair gloves. And after I said, well, after it was all over, I said, well, you're the champion. You tell them what you want to wear. Surely you're the champion. You've got to say, I don't want to wear horsehair gloves, which, I mean, for our listeners out there, the old horsehair gloves used to be able to break away the knuckle part of it and would separate the horsehair, and you could feel your knuckles through it. But the new horsehair gloves, they've got ridges right the way across them, and they're not as easy to play with, basically. But even so.
So what's the difference between the new horsehair gloves and like a normal glove?
Well, the normal ones are foam. They're a foam, and they're even all over. Whereas
the horsehair's going to cut you up.
Well, the horsehair is going to definitely cause more cuts, and almost in the old ones, I've got some at home, which basically they're like almost bare knuckles, because you can feel your knuckles through them once you break the horsehair apart, which used to be an old trick.
Wow.
Yeah. One of the old tricks,
So in terms of, you mentioned Zoo versus Richie. That was a really good quality fight.
Excellent fight.
Do you think that the next step for Tim Zoo would be to head overseas and get some fights in over there and start to make a name for himself on the world stage?
Well, I'd love to see Tim Zoo. I want to speak to No Limit Promotions. I've already had a few preliminary talks with Matt Rose. Maybe next year. We were going to do it this year to get him over in China, get him some exposure, get him some fights overseas. And his father, Kosha's in Russia now.
Do you know why Costa wasn't at the fight? I was a bit surprised he wasn't at the fight.
Yeah, to be honest with you, he's got a lot of big business things happening in Russia. But I think if we happen to get Timmy Zhu on in China at some stage, I'm pretty sure Kostya would be there. I'm in contact with him still. We speak occasionally. As you said, great fighter. And look, Timmy Zhu, big shoes to fill, but he's doing a remarkable job. I actually thought Dwight Ritchie might have been a bit too quick, but unfortunate about Dwight getting the cut eye. But Dwight fought a great fight. And but Timmy Zhu showed me that he can step up different gears and he can adapt to different styles.
The pressure. He seems to be able to rise to the pressure. He doesn't seem like he gets carried away with it.
He's incredibly calm. I was speaking to his manager Glenn Jennings about this only 2 days ago, and he takes everything in his stride. And I think he's inherited that from his father. His father was as cool as a cucumber. And as his father said, the difference between the two of them is like Kostya had 275 amateur fights where Tim had maybe 20 or whatever it was. But they are cut out of the same cloth, and you can see Timmy Zhu maturing every fight. He's doing things that he didn't do a couple of fights ago. He's the real deal. And him and Jeff Horn, like let's say Jeff has a victory over Zarafa, and within 12 months you could possibly see that fight happen. I wouldn't if I was looking after Timmy Zhu, and I don't think his management, Glenn Jennings or No Limit Promotions, would rush into it. But within 12 months, I think it's a possibility that we could see it.
Yeah,
they've both got to keep winning, of course.
Yeah. Jeff Horn has got a massive sort of task ahead of him in Zarafa.
Oh, Zarafa's a tough fight. I think, and I spoke to Jeff about this too. I've watched Michael Zarafa since he's been a young lad. I've seen him spar Zach Dunn, and I've seen him, spar a lot in the gym. I've seen him fight a lot. And look, he's a quality fighter. He's world class. He's still a young man. He's still improving. Under Sam Labruno, I think he's improved more. He's durable. He's very durable. He's got a great boxing IQ. Jeff's unpredictable. It's going to be the first early rounds of this fight are going to tell a story. But if Zarafa can work Jeff Horn out and can handle the pressure, because Jeff Horn's had a few really bad cuts, and Zarafa's got fast hands, got a good jab. He could quite easily cause lacerations around Jeff's eyes as the fight progresses. And it's a two-horse race against two quality opponents. Anything can happen. As you know, we're always one punch from disaster. But you'd think that Jeff Horn would win the fight, but Zarafa's in with a big chance. It's a great opportunity, a great all-Australian fight. It's a ripper.
Last question on Jeff Horn. So he's been to pretty much the top of world boxing. He's fought Manny Pacquiao and he's fought Terence Crawford. He's now fighting back in Australia. Do you think that there's a chance that he goes back up the rankings and maybe can get back to those big international fights?
I've heard rumours that he gets over this fight, he's going to get a version of one of the middleweight titles, an opportunity. Oh, wow. Yeah, I've heard rumours. Oh, wow. I won't mention who it is or where it is, but it's about that he'd have a good chance with. It's going to be interesting to see how he goes at middleweight, but he's very, very strong, very physically strong.
So you don't think he's hit his peak and is going to come back down? Do you think he's going to keep striving forward?
That's a really tough question. You're always one punch and one fight from disaster. Anything can happen in boxing. I'll reserve my judgment until after this fight with Zarafa. If he handles Zarafa easily, which, I don't think is going to happen. I've told Jeff I think it's a tough fight for him because, as I said, Zarafa's a quality world-class fighter. But the fight will tell a story, depending on how he comes out of it, whether he's cut up badly. Look, say, for instance, Jeff received another couple of really bad cuts in this fight and wins on points. He might even think to himself, I've made a few $1 million. I've got 2 kids now. He's talked, he doesn't want to be fighting too long. Unless things go well for him, you never know. He might step out of the sport. And he said he's only going to fight until did he say 35 or 34? Sure. Anyway, he said he's not going to fight too much longer because, he's achieved a great deal already. And, it would be good to see him get a shot at another world title. It would be great, especially at a higher weight. But I would have thought, personally, they would have gone from welterweight to light middleweight, but they've gone straight to middleweight, which is a pretty fair step.
Yeah. And If you had to put the spotlight on one or two young Australian boxers, whether it be guys who are amateurs trying to get to the Olympics, or young pros that you think can really fly the flag for Australia, who would you put the spotlight on?
Oh, look, that's Caesar Matteo Tapia, who fought on the undercard last week. He's one of the standouts for me. He really is something else. I mean, look, I've been involved with Zach Dunn for a long time. Zach Dunn's lost one fight out of 30 professional fights with 24 knockouts. He deserves an opportunity too.
I'd love to get him on this podcast.
Yeah, well, we could get him. I could get him for sure for you. But look, Tim Zoo's on his way up. There's dozens of other names. I really don't want to go into it, but there's so many great prospects, Australian prospects out there at the moment.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much for covering that part of things. Now, I'd love to know how you got involved in boxing. How old were you? What gym were you at? Who was training you?
I was probably 13, living in the Commission Flats in Williamstown. My parents migrated from the United Kingdom when I was 2. I lived in Hamilton in the Western District for a couple of years, where my dad was caretaker for a girls' college. And then we moved to Glenbervie, which is next to Essendon, where I became a Bombers supporter only for a couple of years. Yeah, sort of, isn't it? The drug saga sort of didn't leave a good taste in my mouth. I wasn't very happy with that. But, they're going pretty well. They're still hanging in there this year. But moved from Glenbervie to Williamstown when I was about 8 in the Commission Flats. And we were, Commission Flat family, migrants with them. My dad was relatively uneducated. He was a Lancaster bomber, a fighter pilot. Dad's still with us at nearly 96. He's 96, October 14th. I'm with him every second day. And he did 29 trips over Germany, dropping bombs in the Lancaster bombers, So he's had an amazing life. He's been my Rock of Gibraltar in the corner for nearly all my fights, maybe a few overseas. He wasn't there. Most of them he was. But we lived in the Commission Flats in Williamstown. And when I was about 13, Lionel Rose won the world title in Japan against Fighting Harada. And the whole story of Lionel Rose, where he came from, out of a humpy, basically, Jackson's track, and to achieve what he did on the world stage, Lionel became my idol. By the time when I was 15, and by then we used to in the Commission Flats, and it was tough, like I was in a lot of fights. I'm small in stature, always been pretty cheeky. Dad taught me how to hold my hands up and punch straight, so got in a fair few scraps. Don't really recall losing any, to be honest. I had a few blokes give up on me because I wouldn't give in. But at school, the same thing happened. Got in a fair few scraps at school. And when I was 15, my older brother came home, and we had boxing gloves at home. And my dad, who had about 20 amateur fights, has sort of shown us how to punch straight, keep your head down, and stuff like that, just basic stuff. When I was about 15, my older brother came home and said he was 17, said he'd been to a local gym and he could fight my brother, but he never did, but he could have. And I went the next night and trained and sparred one of their guys, and the trainer there said, David something or other, his name was David, can't even think of it now, it's that long ago. He said, yeah, you can fight. So I trained for 3 weeks, twice a week for 3 weeks, and I had my first amateur fight against a guy that had 9 or 10 fights, and I won. I won on points.
What was your tactics, if any?
I just barreled in there and threw straight punches and won the fight. It was a split decision. My girlfriend was there at ringside, and I thought, this is me, because I was right-handed and left-footed, and I wasn't much of a footballer. My brother was a very good footballer, played for Willie for seconds, and I think he might have played for the first as well. Soccer would have been my sport, but back in those days, everyone used to bag you and call it wog ball, and you'd end up punching on with someone at school. Do that? Well, soccer's a great sport, and I would have been good at that. But boxing, it just was natural for me. So I won 5 straight as an amateur, and then I lost 5 straight. And they basically started throwing me in with guys that had 50, 60, 70, 80 fights, and I'd had 5 or 6 fights. So I won 5 and I lost 5, but I reckon 4 were bad decisions. I still reckon only a guy called Trevor Arnott from Geelong, and I hope someone down there, I haven't contacted or heard from Trevor for 30-odd, 40 years, but a guy called Trevor Arnott beat me. It was close, and his trainer, Bobby Murdoch, said to me, and I was about 17 then, he said to me, listen, you're not an amateur. He said, don't muck around with the amateurs, turn professional, because I'm short in stature. The amateurs like long, tall, rangy fighters, defence, like it's a bit more like
Lots
fencing. He said, but turn professional. So I end up going to Alan Meeker. I moved to a trainer called Alan Meeker in Oak Park. I had 7 fights with Alan Meeker, won 6 of them, and then turned professional when I was 18. He made me wait for 6 months. I wanted to turn professional before then, but I turned professional when I was 18. On TV ringside, I won my first 7 fights, won best first year boxer on ringside, and never looked back. And by then I'd had this dream and goal. One stage, I was going to go as far as I could. Boxing was my career, and I was going to fight for a world title. Didn't see beyond it, but I wanted to hear the man saying 15 3-minute rounds for the championship of the world, and that was my goal and dream. But then we had, on ringside, we had a couple of deaths, there was a couple of serious injuries, and Courage Brewery pulled out sponsorship, and basically boxing died. And so I went from fighting 6-rounders, ready to go into main events on TV ringside for pretty good money back in those days, to fighting in halls like the Marconi Ballroom and Emerald Hall and all these different places. 10-rounders. My first 10-rounder, I think my first 3 10-rounders, I got $250, and fought guys
so this
like.
was the state of Australian boxing in the late 70s.
Yeah, 70 or 78. I finally won the Australian title in 1978 in Coonabarabran.
And you had to go and start seeking fights abroad, and
I couldn't get fights here.
Title.
I couldn't get fights here, so I fought in the Philippines once. I lost a points decision there to Nini John in Cebu City in 1976, and then I came home, and that was at just over featherweight, and I struggled to make the weight, and then I moved up quite a bit in weight, and I went to Indonesia, and I fought the OPBF champion and WBC number 7 light welterweight in the world, Wongso Cecino, and beat him on points. So won that, and then they kept me there, and I had 3 more fights. So I ended up having 5 fights in Indonesia, 1 in the Philippines, and basically from then on, as Australian champion, I'd defend the Australian title once or twice a year. I defended it, I think, 9 or 10 times over a decade. I never lost it. But I just didn't have the fights in Australia that I could have. I basically had fought everyone. I fought Blakeney Matthews, fought Joe Gibalisco. I lost one here and there. I lost to Jeff Malcolm in 1977. But there was a reason for that. That's because I decided to retire before. But take nothing from Jeff Malcolm. He was a great fighter. Great champion. So eventually 1981 was when I got to the stage where I'd knocked Jimmy Brown out in the 15th round. It was my 4th fight with Jimmy Brown. The first time I actually beat him, when I stopped him in the 15th round, at the end of the 14th round, my dad said to me, son, you've won this fight. I can't take this one off you, but for God's sake, go out and stop him in the last round, because I'd fought him in the amateurs. My first loss was for the state bantamweight title. Thought I won it. Then I fought him a 6-rounder in the professionals. Thought I won it and lost the decision, but they're close fights, and Jimmy Brown was a quality fighter, quality bloke as well. And then the third fight was another fight I promoted at Williamstown Town Hall at the end of round 1. Hit me right on the corner of my eye with the elbow, 2 minutes and 58 seconds in round 1. Split it from one to the other, 24-stitch cut, technical draw. So then the 4th fight was the 15-rounder. So I beat him, and the promoter, John Brown, he was a tennis promoter. Then he bought out Langton Tanago from Zimbabwe for me to fight for the Commonwealth lightweight title, which I was a big underdog. He'd just beaten Ken Buchanan, and I won that clearly over 15 rounds. I'd lost a 15-rounder previously to Billy Moella for the super featherweight title. That was in Orange, and it was another fight that felt could have gone either way.
Yeah.
So basically I was learning on the road and taking fights against whoever I could.
Were you going out to Indonesia and the Philippines? Was that to get recognition and to put your face on bouts and get some recognition in different countries, or was that because the paydays were bigger?
No, the paydays. I mean, I was fighting in Indonesia for $1,000.
I imagine it would.
When I went to Coonabarabran to win the Australian title, 15 3-minute rounds, I got 750. And had to charter a single-engine Cessna up there, which Glenn Walsh, my sparring partner's brother, flew up. Lenny Walsh, if you're out there, Lenny. I know he's been crook for a long, long time, but a great bloke. Yeah, so it was just tough. Boxing was pretty well dead, and I knew I was world class, and I knew I could one day fight for a world title, and that was the dream and the goal. And so I'd go wherever I was offered a fight. Money was a secondary thing. You know, I was working jobs here and there. But after I won the Commonwealth title the first time, and I wanted to end up losing it and winning it back again. But after I won it the first time, I thought, I had a great job with the Department of Aviation. I was working at Essendon Airport and Tullamarine Airport as an air safety officer. And I thought, I'm going to make that much money now. I won the Commonwealth title. I can give work away. But that was the worst blue I ever made.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, because, just you run out of money and you're fighting I'd average 4 fights a year. Fights would fall over or you'd get a cut eye. And, yeah, so it was a real tough, hard road. And Lester Ellis, I started sparring Lester Ellis when he was 12. I was 22. I picked him as a future world champion when he was 12.
When he first, do you remember that session vividly, sort of when you were in the gym and when he came in as a little kid, and then how that sort of transpired?
Yeah, because I used to go around the gyms and spar, whoever they put in front of me, and I'd spar, 6, 8, young blokes one after another, just to give them, and I wouldn't hurt them. I'd just move around with them and show things to them. And this young kid, Lester Ellis, jumped in the ring with me and attacked me with sort of fearless abandon at 12. I was 22, and he was fast and he moved well and, was very basic. But I got out the ring and I said, what's this kid's name? They said, Lester Ellis. I said, this kid's going to be a world champion. So then I trained at that gym a lot, and Lester and Graham Brooks, the two of my later opponents, became great mates and sparring partners. And Graham was a couple of years older than Lester, but another great champion. And so I used to spar them. They used to come to my place. We used to run together. I used to take them through punches. And with Lester in particular, not so much with Graham, but with Lester in particular, Lester's father always led me to believe that I was going to take over his career when I retired, because they figured that would happen. And it's now sort of history that
the career was what?
Well, when my career, because I was by the time Lester turned professional, I was 28.
Yeah.
Fought Frank Rapper's Ash Wednesday, went and got involved in a restaurant. Was still hoping I was as high as number 2 in the world in the lightweight division. Fought as high as 63.5, still hoping I'm going to get a shot at a world title, but it didn't look like it was going to happen. And then all of a sudden, Lester Ellis comes on the scene and in, 17 or 18 fights, wins the world title. And there I am at, 30 years of age and haven't had a shot, been so close, signed contracts with Bob Arum overseas. There's a million stories I could tell you, but things that fell over and promised to me and opportunities that fell over. And then Lester wins the world title, which I was absolutely wrapped for him. But I'm in the gym one day with my dad and I said, Dad, I'm going to challenge Lester Ellis. And he said, what do you mean, at a catch weight? And I said, no, at super featherweight or junior lightweight. He goes, son, you can't make that weight. I said, well, yeah, I think I can, but I hadn't fought at it since 1976 when I lost a 15-round decision to Billy Moella in Orange, which I really did struggle to make the weight, but I didn't know about nutrition then. So I said, Dad, I've never done it right. And I'll be honest with our listeners, I've always loved the drink. Wine mainly, not a big beer drinker. I've always loved my wine. I've always loved my food. So I always struggled with weight. It was always the worst part about boxing, and I think most boxers will agree with that when you have to make weight. You have to be really strict. But I basically... my trainer, Ray Stiles, didn't think I could do it. My dad didn't think I could do it. But I just said, look, I've got to do this, try and do this right. So I went to a dietitian, I went to a doctor, and they had my fat content weight underwater at the Footscray RMIT and worked out that at around about a body fat content of, I think it was 6 or 7%, a bit like a marathon runner, I could make the weight relatively comfortably. Might have been a bit higher than that, Jake, I'm not sure, but I can't remember exactly now. But I went to Karen Inge, who's on radio still, and Karen Inge put me on a diet of 1,000 calories a day, which was basically next to nothing. It was everything steamed, grilled, no oil, no salt, no sugar, no butter, no gravy, and I used to weigh and calorie count every single thing I put in my mouth. Once a week I'd have a good feed. Well, anyway, as it turned out, 1 month before the fight, I'm down to the weight, sparred 15 3-minute rounds with Glenn Walsh, Graham Brooks, Darcy Ritchie, and another young fellow, I can't remember his name, but 4 of them, 15 rounds, and actually made the weight.
You must have, when you were sparring those rounds after that, after depriving yourself of calories for so long and losing so much weight, you must have been spent.
No. Once I got down to the weight, I did a trial weigh-in, like I would do day before the fight, carbohydrate loaded, and then sparred 15 rounds, and did it comfortably. Felt strong as a bull. I was still as strong as I was at light welterweight. And that was the thing, a month before the fight, the notorious Alphonse Gangitano, who was involved in the promotion, rang me up and said, "Do you need more tickets?" And I said, "Yeah, I do." I said, "But stop backing Lester." And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "I know you're backing Lester. He can't beat me." And I said, "I've sparred 15 rounds today. I made the weight and he cannot beat me." And he said, "Oh, I know, I love you both like brothers," or something similar to that. "I'm not betting on this fight," but they lost a lot of money, and they were filthy on me for it too. And people said there was all these rumours about I was supposed to take a dive, but no one ever offered me to take a dive, and I never would have anyway. I was offered a lot of money to take dives 3 times, and the biggest one was overseas for about $300,000 US in 1985.
Are you able to divulge what happened there?
All I can say, it was in Denmark. And I could name the guy and everything, but I won't do that.
Yep,
I might, at some stage it might come out. I don't even know whether he's still alive, but I think he is. But he actually came out, he saw me knock Mark Fernandez out in my second world title defence in 4 rounds, a guy he was number 4 in the world. He'd just beaten Rod Sequenin in Hawaii, and I knocked him out in 4 rounds, and we went out for lunch, and he said to me, "My boy can't beat you. We want a world title," and he made me that offer, made me an incredible offer, and she said, "Look, I'm not interested."
Yeah, I can imagine, especially with the Lester Ellis fight, like that had been your holy grail.
Yes,
getting that world title. So no sort of offer to take a dive would ever have even.
No, there was there was 2 fights before that, 2 different fights I was offered to take dives, and one of them, which was made pretty well public, it actually hit the papers, was Lucky Gattelari. Rocky Gattelari made a comeback, and so did Lucky Gattelari, and Paul Ferrari fought Rocky Gattelari. I fought Lucky Gattelari at the Horton Pavilion, and I got $1,500 for the fight, and I was offered $15,000 to throw it back then, which is probably a pretty good deposit on a house back then. But I wouldn't even consider it. Never would consider it. Never interested. Even the last one, and I thought, $300,000 in 1985 was a lot of money, and it
still is.
Still is a lot of money. Yeah, still is a lot of money. But you look at the money some of Australia's fighters have made since. Kostya, the great, Anthony Mundine, Danny Green. They've made some serious money, and good luck to them. Jeff Fennick, of course. Jeff did exceptionally well. Always been a great money earner, and had some big fights overseas, and undoubtedly one of our greatest. But yeah, I think you're going to see Australia per capita. As far as producing world champions, we're one of the strongest boxing nations in the world professionally, not as amateur. We've never had a gold medalist in the amateurs, which I'd love to see.
Do you think it's possible at Tokyo?
I could be critical. I could be, and I will be critical. I think that the amateur hierarchy in Australia have always tended to push away the professionals, like even myself and other people, whereas they're the people that have reached the upper echelons in boxing, whether it be amateur or professional. Someone like Brian Tink, who had 470 amateur fights, one of Australia's greats, maybe would have been a great amateur coach, or definitely someone like Kostya Tszyu, who won the world amateur gold medal. You need a man that's been a top in my way of thinking. You need someone that's reached the top level. And look, they've made lots of mistakes. We haven't been successful. I don't think we've had anyone pass the second round in the Olympics for decades, for as long as I can remember. We won 2 silvers. We've never won a gold. I'd love to see it, because the first Australian that does win a gold medal at the Olympics is going to be a superstar overnight, and I hope it happens. But I just think they possibly...
I've got a good friend of mine, Jason Melia, going to, hopefully, fingers crossed, he goes
I know
to
the name,
Russia
yeah.
to the world champs in a few
Well, good
weeks,
luck to him.
And then he hopefully qualifies for Tokyo, but he's got the Australian titles and everything.
Good.
So
Look, I'd love to see it. But what's his name now? I met a former professional world champion from the United Kingdom. I can't think of his name just offhand, but professional world super middleweight champion who I commentated with out here, and he was telling me as an amateur. You got the Australian Institute of Sport. They were paid a wage. They were given accommodation wherever they go. They get flown everywhere. It's totally different in Australia. Our guys struggle. The funding's not there. And if you want people to win Olympic gold medals, you need to tip some serious funding in. They have tipped funding in and brought in, and I'm not going to mention names here either, but they brought in coaches from overseas, and they haven't appeared to be very successful, to be honest. And I mean, I think it's a terribly sad thing that you would have at least maybe tried to grab someone like the great Kostya Tszyu, who's been a great amateur as well. And, I think don't necessarily need guys that have been great fighters to make great fighters, but you need guys with great experience in amateur and professional, in my opinion.
Yeah.
They obviously think differently to what I do. And also you need better funding so that our amateur boxers don't have to worry about their accommodation. They just train full-time. They're full-time. So many of the amateurs around the world, they're semi-professional because they're paid a wage, they're housed, they're looked after.
Yeah, that would be cool to see us.
That's what we need. We need that for sure.
It's such a good platform for people to eventually get into the pros.
Undoubtedly, Jake. For sure. But they've amateurs in Australia. The way I've always seen it, there's too many warring bodies. I've seen a lot of bad decisions, and it's soul destroying for some lads. You've undoubtedly seen it too. You think how could they give that decision that way? In a professional fight because it's longer rounds. And it does happen in the professionals. We've all seen it. But, I'd love to see an Australian amateur boxer win a gold medal, but I think it's going to be a while.
Yeah. And so just getting back to to your fights now, before Lester Ellis, what would you say was your hardest, toughest fight?
Oh, probably the hardest night ever in my life was Frank Ropus on Ash Wednesday.
I was actually just speaking to one of our trainers downstairs, and he said, make sure you ask him about the Frank Ropus fight.
Well, Frank was the welterweight champion of Australia. I was the lightweight champion, and we fought at a catchweight of 63.5. And it was, just so happened that it was Ash Wednesday. It was like 47 degrees or 46 degrees or whatever in Melbourne, and 55 degrees under the lights, and Frank hadn't been
Rumble in the jungle type atmosphere.
Oh, for sure. Frank Ropus hadn't been beaten in 7 or 8 years. He'd just stopped the great Hector Thompson. He'd just beaten Baby Cassius. He was on fire. And we'd sparred in the gym maybe half a dozen times or more. And I knew it was going to be a war. I knew how physically strong he was and relentless he was. But, I was just a bit slicker and smarter, and I figured that I might wear him out late in the fight, which is sort of what happened. But, oh, God, it was hell and back. That was probably the physically toughest fight of my life. And Frank and I are great mates today, and he's just a champion bloke and a champion fighter. But probably my greatest victory ever was against Al Earthquake Carter. And when I fought Carter, he had 23 KOs in 24 fights. He won his last 19 by knockout within 4 rounds. And don't worry,
you were a massive underdog for that.
Massive underdog. No one ever hit me as hard. Round 8's the closest. I had 60 professional fights in my career.
Was starching everyone that he was coming up against.
He was stiff and knocking everyone out. Well, they tell me, I don't know if it's 100% correct, but they tell me he beat Hearns and Pryor in the amateurs as an amateur. And I was told, this is true, Jake, just before I lost the world title in 1987 to Rocky Lockridge in the United Kingdom, I had to go to Norfolk, Virginia. I had to go to the IBF convention to get up and represent myself, and I was told by David Wolfe, who was the manager of Boom Boom Mancini, that I was on the short list of contenders to fight Boom Boom for the world lightweight title, because him and Al Carter were both from Alliance, Ohio, and he said, Barry, we didn't fancy Ray with Carter. He said, when you beat him, he said, we weren't going to fight you, and neither was anyone else. So that set me back. That was 1982. That set me back years, that victory over Carter. I did sign a world title fight contract with Bob Arum. When I signed up with Leo Berry, Leo McDonald, Jeff Patterson and Spider Holman, the Waterfront Gang, my team. When I signed up with them, the next thing I know, I'm on a plane, first class, to New York City, met Bob Arum in his office. He said to me, if you can fight as good as you can talk, you're going to make a lot of money, which was a good laugh. And I caught up with Bob last year in a couple of times. And he's amazing at 87. His memory is incredible. Anyway, I signed a contract with him to fight Juan Arroyo in Miami. This is about 83, I think it would have been. Went home, then went back with Dana Goodson, who later trained Lester Ellis. He was my trainer. I'd bought him from Hawaii, which he jumped ship after what happened in Hawaii. My dad, myself, and my first wife, Sandy, we all went to Miami to finalised training for the Juan Arroyo fight in the Fontainebleau Hilton, live American television, 25,000 US for me, and when I won a minimum 55,000 to fight Harry Arroyo, who was no relation to Juan Arroyo, who I fought. Well, I didn't fight him there because my last sparring session in the famous Fifth Street gym, I say to people, that's where Muhammad Ali trained, Roberto Duran, Sugar Ray Leonard, Barry Michael, we all trained there. It's an incredible gym, and I saw some amazing stories in that. Some things happened in that gym. Duran was training there with us at that stage.
Did you ever meet any of those guys?
Yeah, I met most of them. Yeah, Duran was training with me. They actually thought I was a spy.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they thought I was a spy. It's a lot of stories like that. I've met Tommy Hearns. I've met Marvin Hagler. I never met Mike Tyson. I never met Ali. I've met Lennox Lewis. I've met Riddick Bowe, Evander Holyfield quite a few times. Met Gennady Golovkin. He's a wonderful bloke. But anyway, cut a long story short, my last sparring session to fight Juan Arroyo, National American Television, I'd had this nagging heel injury, which was plantar fasciitis. I'd had 3 cortisone shots within 6 weeks. My last sparring session against a Canadian called Mario Cusson, I stepped forward on the ball of my foot and it just went and ripped the band of tissue completely off my heel. Collapsed, came home, and the physio said they'd never seen a complete plantar fascia tear without an operation, but the cortisone had weakened the tissue, so it put me out of action for months. But 5 months later, we brought Juan Arroyo out of Melbourne, and I stopped him in, I think it was 7 rounds. He lost, I think, 2 out of about 22 at that stage, but I cut him up pretty badly and stopped him. But it meant nothing in Australia. You know, like if it had been in America on American television, I would have still got the shot. But Bob Arum never forgot. I couldn't believe it when I saw him before Pacquiao fought Jeff Horn. I went up and shook hands and I said, do you remember? He said, Barry, how are you? I said, good, Bob. I said, do you remember? He said, of course, Juan Arroyo. I went, wow, incredible memory at 87,
Yeah. Well, how did that fight go down? So you stopped him in the 7th?
I stopped him in the 7th, yeah.
Fight before then?
It was a tough fight, yeah. He was a quality opponent. We still were in contact. We speak quite a bit on Facebook and that,
Seems like you're juggling a lot of contacts, a lot of people.
Yeah, well, it's good, I've caught up with, Graham Brooks and I are great mates. Lester and I are great mates now. The people you fight, you've got a bond with them forever, basically.
You take a piece of each other in a way.
In a way you do, yeah.
Bond,
it's true, Jake.
You shared the ring together.
Yeah, well, Frank and I had a pretty, hostile relationship for quite a while after I beat him because, it sort of stalled his career and he was pretty dirty on me for a while. But we're great mates now, and he's a wonderful bloke.
When you're in, say, 45 degree, just as one example of when you've had to really have trying conditions. What gets you through those sorts of fights? Like, how do you dig deep and find a way to just sort of mentally persevere?
That's a good question, to be honest. I think it's either just something you've got or you haven't got.
I find it interesting that you say that though, because you mentioned at the start of the podcast that you got in a lot of fights as a kid and you can't remember losing one, even though you were small in stature.
Yeah, I wouldn't give up.
Do you think that it is just something that you've had in your mind?
Well, my dad always taught me basically don't give up, never give up what your dreams and goals are. And there was a couple of fights I had at school, and Russell Yardley's one of them. We didn't speak for probably 40 years, but Russell's the director of a company now, and I've been director of a few companies as well. And we caught up, but he punched the soul case out of me, but he surrendered. So I technically won the fight.
Yeah, it's like the Homer Simpson fight. I don't know if you've ever watched The Simpsons. He just gets beaten up until they can't punch anymore, and then he just knocks them out.
Yeah, well, I had a couple of fights like that, but Russell Yardley could fight. He was very cocky as well, and they were always generally bigger than me, and longer arms, and I got a lot of scraps at school, and so I can't really one-on-one. I can't recall losing one.
Is there something that when you've had your pro fights down the line, some of your bigger fights, is there something that you can channel that really gives you that sort of extra strength, or is that something that you just sort of have that never say die, that attitude?
I think it's that never say die attitude that my dad instilled to me as a young lad, and once I started to progress in boxing and had other trainers speak to me and started to realise more and more what I could do, and it's frustrating when I see guys that have got ability and don't basically grab it. I've seen it a million times in boxing. And look, as I said, I always loved a party and loved to drink at that. But when a fight was lined up, I'd train hard. I'd live properly, and you've got to respect this sport because it's a dangerous sport, that's for sure.
I think that it's so interesting when you see the different perspectives on how different people go about achieving greatness. If you look at someone like, we'll use Lester Ellis as an example. His mum left him when he was a little kid, and he had that sort of anger towards the world.
He did.
And he channeled that in that way.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually.
Like Andy Ruiz, who's just beaten Anthony Joshua, and he came from a really poor upbringing where he had to suffer a lot. And after the fight, he said to his mum, we don't have to suffer anymore.
Yep.
And it's so interesting to see how different people go about it.
Well, great to see. And I mean, that's probably why... I come from not a privileged background. As I said, my dad did a remarkable job because he was started as a postman when we moved to Williamstown, peddling around, putting letters in, and then he went to university and night school and got a university degree, and ended up with 300 people under him before he retired. So Dad's been a great mentor and a great example for me of never say die attitude. And my dad, like me, I'm very, very physically strong for my size, and that was one of my biggest assets always. And my dad's the same. He's incredibly strong, and to see what he went through in the war as well, I think I certainly inherited it from him. My durability and toughness. And that, I mean, my mum hasn't been with us for a long time, passed away from breast cancer, but she was a wonderful woman. But I think my toughness and durability comes from my father's side. And I've got Irish-English blood. My grandmother was fully Irish, so a bit of a mixture.
You think that's where you got your sort of smart-ass thing from
the Irish side? Could possibly be. I'm not really sure, to be honest.
I just find it so funny when people talk to each other in the ring, and the things that they say, because when you're in the heat of the battle, right, at that moment it's quite hard unless it's something that comes naturally to you. It's hard to be able to talk to someone and to be able to be witty, and that was something that you did quite well.
Round 3 with Lester, when Gus Mercurio stepped between us and warned me for punching low, and then said box on, and for a split second I sort of was thinking about what he'd said to me, and Lester went on with it, and Lester picked me up with an uppercut and smashed me with the right hand, and I was in Disneyland. It was one of the biggest shots I ever took, and he knew I was badly hurt, and he bombarded me, and I tried to grab him, and he pushed me off. 3 times he bombarded me. Finally I got him, and I said to him in his ear, I got him, pulled him close, and I said, if that's the best you can do, you want to forget it. He said to me afterwards, he said, I was the only bloke he fought that could talk and fight for 15 rounds.
That's the thing. That's what I find so fascinating, is that you can talk and fight.
He said if we fought again, he'd wear earplugs. Yeah. I talked to a lot of my opponents. I talked to Frank, and I had a few words, or Frank was just basically wanting to kill me.
Do you remember what you said to him?
Frank, I just would hit him with some good clean body shots, and I'd go, that hurt you, didn't it, Frank? You're going to be able to take them all night. He'd just go, And, you know, he was relentless. He was just relentless and so strong. You know, I had 14. He hit me. We'd sparred in the gym years before, and he hit me with an uppercut and put the buckle of my head guard under my chin. I think I had 6 or 7 stitches. Without the head guard on the night of the fight, he hit me with the uppercut and it had a 14-stitch cut there, and my teeth came right through here. And they sort of rolled over there. 14 under the chin.
For who are just listening, so under the chin you had a
14-stitch cut under the chin, and about 5 or 6 in the mouth where my gum had folded over my teeth, and my teeth had come right through. And, you know, my left eye was cut as well. I actually looked a bit of a mess after the fight.
I can imagine.
I remember I met Bob Hawke the next day or the day after for the Royal Children's Hospital telethon, I think. The great man Bob Hawke, and he watched the fight and he congratulated me.
Was he sculling a few beers or no?
No. I'd had quite a few beers after the Frank Rovers fight, because I went straight to North Melbourne Social Club and rehydrated after the stinking heat. And, you know...
You might have been a bit thirsty.
I was thirsty. And I met Bob Hawke, and my head had blown up overnight. You know, 2 days later you always look a lot worse, and I'd blown up big time. And he congratulated me, said what a great fight it was because it was televised. And as he walked away, I heard him say, "My God, Barry Michael won the fight. Imagine what Frank Rovers looks like." So I was a bit of a mess.
Yeah, I can imagine. And then with the Lester Ellis fight, I remember him saying that if he had have fought that same fight, but it were somebody else who he didn't have as much respect for and who didn't get in his head like that, then he reckons he would have won the fight. Yeah,
I think he's probably changed his tune on that, to be honest, Lester. Going back about 3 or 4 years, and Lester's really going well now. He hasn't had a drink for years.
That's fantastic to see.
But he said to me, because he did have some issues, he said to me a couple of years ago when we were having a beer, he goes, "Baz, the next time we do a talk, I'm going to tell the truth." And I said, "What do you mean?" Because for years I lived under this shadow that I wouldn't give him a rematch, which wasn't true. I was always willing to have the rematch. It was talked about.
It would have been a massive fight.
It would have been a massive fight, massive payday. And Lester basically has said on radio, and he said it in public, that he never wanted a rematch. I always had his number, and he never could have beaten me. And, you know, it took him 30-odd years, but that's what he said since. And look,
it was like kind of the big brother mentality. Like you can't really beat your big brother, and he sort of came up idolising you in a way.
Yeah, but, you know, they honestly believed, and I don't believe that if I'd have been someone different, Lester would have beaten me, because styles make fights, and I had the style. I was an endurance fighter. Lester was too, but Lester was... You know, if I had have trained Lester and kept training him, Lester would have used his jab much more. He didn't. People say he didn't use his jab when he fought me. Well, I took that away from him.
You made him fight your fight.
I made him fight my fight, and that's what experience does. But if I had been his trainer, I think Lester could have been possibly the greatest Australian ever, because I would have changed things with him, and because Lester became so... and, you know, Keith no longer with us, but Keith became one of Australia's great trainer, but it was always with Keith about the big bombs, the big knockout punch, rather than the smartness of boxing. And you know, Lester could have developed a better jab and used the jab and used more higher boxing IQ than he did, because Lester had this incredible killer instinct. He wanted to blast everyone out of there, and I mean everyone, in the gym as well. And as you said, he had that pain from what had happened when he was a young boy with his mother leaving him, and that was what was one of the things that ate Lester up, you know, and drove him to be what he was. But yeah, some incredible talent, Lester. He's probably the greatest natural talent that I'd ever come across, you know, in my career.
Do you think that that's like a matter of, you know, coordination and, you know, the ability to want to come forward, to want to fight, to have a fight?
Yeah, a combination of everything, really. And, you know, as you said, you know, Lester came from a relatively poor background, and his mother had left his father, and that gave him something to, like, get between his teeth and, you know, make him bitter against the world, which boxing was a great release for him. And he just became so good at it. He was just so natural as well, you know. I mean, he couldn't have got to where he was if he wasn't the natural athlete and had natural reflex. He was incredibly hard to hit too. He moved his head extremely well. Just a great all-round athlete.
So do you know of any examples of people who have gotten to get to like a really, really high level of boxing without being a really good athlete, with just sheer toughness?
Yes, definitely. I've seen guys that, a lot of it's the mindset, and so much of boxing is in your mind, what you want to achieve and what you want to get to. And I mean, you see some fighters that have got all the ability in the world and they'll never make it, and other guys that haven't got as much ability but have got the determination and the drive and the toughness and will achieve things that guys with more ability can't achieve.
Yeah, it's interesting. Do you know of any examples of people who they can be talented as well, but who are just tough to the core?
That I've dealt with, there'd be a stack, but let me think now. Well, Frank Rovers is one for sure. Frank was just relentless. Frank wasn't like a super slick boxer.
Couldn't take no for an answer.
Would walk through a brick wall. Just relentless. Trained hard, run marathons. Just lived and trained and ate boxing, and he just a machine. He was just an absolute machine. And, to stop guys like Hector Thompson and Baby Cassius when Baby Cassius was at his best, beat them over 15 rounds by just sheer work rate and strength and pressure. Frank's a great example of that, what you can achieve.
Yeah. And what was your tactic when you went in to fight Lester Ellis? Because obviously the mental warfare was kind of there. You had the post there of him saying enemy on it. He said that he had your face on the dartboard.
Yeah.
There was a little bit of bad blood.
There was
Dana
really
Goodson
bad blood.
Had changed corners.
Yeah, Dana
It was almost
Goodson.
like it's something that you'd have to see in a movie. But it's just insane the amount of build up there was.
Dana Goodson, after I collapsed in Miami with the heel injury, within a week of getting back to Melbourne, Dana Goodson had jumped ship and was Lester's trainer. And I was filthy on that because I'd bought Dana. I'd lived in Hawaii with Dana, lived in a little dingy flat with him, trained with him. He was number 2 kickboxer in the world. I said to him, I'll bring you to Australia and I'll make you a superstar. And I brought him to Australia and no one would fight him here. I did promote one of his fights here, but then he became a legendary trainer and mentor for so many kickboxers and boxers. And to be honest with you, Dana's passed away quite a long time ago. I was so filthy on him when he jumped ship and trained Lester. But we ended up mates again. I sort of buried the hatchet with him years later. But yeah, well, I was pretty dirty at the time when he did what he did.
And did you feel that because obviously not everyone would have thought that you could have gone and, won that fight?
Most people
made the weight as well.
Yeah,
there's a lot of factors.
Well, Dana was, in retrospect, when I look back on it, Dana's one of the main reasons why I got the fight. It was, it's history now, but Dana jumped ship, became Lester's trainer. In Hawaii, Dana had seen me struggle to make, I think it was 62.5 or 63.5 for a fight against Mike Anderson, whatever it was. I came in over the weight, a kilo over the weight, and had to sweat it off. And, I had to make 58.95, and there I am struggling to make 62.5 or whatever it was. So Dana didn't think there was any way possible I could make the weight. And I sort of knew that he would be telling him I can't make the weight and be strong. And really no one believed that I could do it except myself and my nutritionist and my dietitian, Karen Inchi, and the guys who weighed me underwater, my fat content. And I did it, properly for the first time. I mean, science in boxing is so important, and to get to a weight as low as you possibly can and retain your strength at the upper echelon of boxing is really, really important.
It's like a balancing act, isn't it?
It is. It really is.
And did you feel like when you came into that fight, you were like, I know this kid, I know what his personality is like, I've taught him things, as you said, you've taught him everything that he knows, but not everything that you know.
Yeah, it was a real psychological battle, and I just had the utmost belief in myself that over 15 rounds, which, I was a 15-round fighter, the longer a fight went, the stronger I would get, and I just figured over 15 rounds I'd be too physically strong for him, and I was a body puncher, and the body punches would wear him down, as they did Graham Brooks and so many other quality fighters. Like when I fought Graham Brooks, that was a fight that I love Graham Brooks, and I lost the Commonwealth title on a 15-round split decision to Claude Noel. He beat Claude Noel. I was the number 1 contender. He had to fight me, and I beat him up pretty badly, Graham. But yeah, I just had the physical strength and seasoning And I was, look, at that stage, I'd had, 55 fights when I fought Graham, 56 when I fought Lester. A lot of experience on these guys, 18 fights, 20 fights. Experience is a great thing in boxing. And I just figured with Lester, with my pressure, my physical strength, and my body punching over 15 rounds, I figured I'd stop him late in the fight. But, to Lester's credit, he was still banging away big time. Broke my nose in the 12th round. He was still banging away big time. The 12th round, Joe Bugner picked and my nose was broken because he smashed me with the right hand, but beyond about round 7, you're beyond pain and exhaustion and you don't really feel the punches as much. And Lester smashed me with the right hand and Joe Bugner picked it. And blood was just streaming out of my nose down the first time I was busted. And I came back the corner and I said, my trainer, Ray Styles, Kid Lewis, goes, great round, you're 3 rounds, you're champion of the world. I went, he's broken me effing nose. And he goes, forget it, 3 rounds, you're champion of the world. I said, I was looking for some sympathy. I said, but he's broken me effing nose. Forget it. And
you weren't getting any sympathy?
No sympathy. And I went out and won the last 3 rounds and it was a bit of an anticlimax. It was, I think, 5, 6 and 7 points, unanimous decision, and the new IBF champion, which was, one of the greatest highlights of my life, to be honest, Jack,
Is there words that can sort of encapsulate how that feels?
No, incredible feeling. And I explained this the other night before the Tim Tszyu, Dwight Ritchie fight. It's hard for someone to explain when you've prepared for a big fight mentally and physically and you've put everything into it. And, for a major title or even something at a lower level, even for an amateur title, it's just the greatest feeling you can possibly have to compete with someone, beat them on a level of a mental level and a physical level and, and win. It's no other feeling like it.
I have absolutely no idea how that would feel, but I can imagine, if I do try and imagine it, what I imagine is just the ultimate test of self-will and the ultimate test of character. And, because many people, if they're trying to achieve something really great, they'll probably waver in their self-belief. But to maintain a level of self-belief and get to a point where you can beat the other guy who's also the best is just... Yeah,
well, that's when it comes down to your mental strength, and that's something that fortunately I was always good at. And I think, as I said, my father instilled that into me. And to see what my father went through, 30 trips with what they call a tour over Germany or over doing in the Lancaster bombs, and after 30 trips you finished the tour, you could walk away. Well, Dad did 29 and the war was over, so he didn't have to do the 30th, but there was about a 1 in 3 chance of surviving one tour. So it was every time you'd go out. Imagine sitting on the airstrip, in a Lancaster bomber, knowing that you're going to fly over Germany and drop bombs on people and hope that you're going to come back. It would have been just hard to comprehend, isn't it?
It's almost like a different sort of level of...
It's hard to comprehend. It's your life,
Yeah. My old man was also in the army for South Africa.
Wow. Yeah. Okay.
And he was a South African, and he was in the bushes of Angola.
Whew.
And I think the mental strength when you're doing something like being in the army like being in a war zone is just next level. He told me that there'd be times when people would go bush mad, and when he says that you go bush mad, is that you're obviously in the bush, and people go so stir crazy by the training and by the isolation, by the mental torture. And what they see, that they'll just literally lose their minds.
I believe it.
In a ball and just curl up.
Yeah, well, I find it hard to comprehend what our parents went through with the Second World War or other wars, Vietnam War, or just to. I did Kokoda last year. Just what our soldiers did against the Japanese in New Guinea was just beyond belief. And boxing's a tough sport, but when you look at what our forefathers have done, and that incredible. And I just can't. War is such a fruitless thing, and it's just horrible. And there's wars happening all around the world, and it's just a terrible waste of life, and just something that's just hard to comprehend. To be honest, terrible, really. To be honest,
I couldn't agree more. So, if you had to look at all of the fights that you've been to recently, which one would you look at and say that is one of the toughest fights that I've seen?
The greatest fight I've ever seen live through my boxing career was Aaron Pryor versus Alexis Arguello.
Okay.
Aaron Pryor that night, that was at the Miami Orange Bowl. I think it was about 83, I think. Aaron Pryor that night, and Aaron Pryor later came out that he was a pretty heavy cocaine user. Whether that was used on the night or not, there's debate about that. But he was inhuman that night. The way he fought relentlessly for 14, stopped Arguello in the 14th round, and I've seen a million great fights in Australia as well, but just some of the greater fights like Muhammad Ali against Joe Frazier, the first fight even, to come back after 3.5 years out and to be beaten that first time and to be knocked down in the 15th round and to get up and finish the fight, and then to come back and beat Frazier twice after that, what a fighter, what a man. And Roberto Duran's another one that, he fought until he was in his 50s. And
these are some of your favourites.
They're my favourites, probably. And, Sugar Ray Leonard was another one of my favourites. And I've had the pleasure of meeting Sugar Ray on a few occasions and Roberto quite a bit.
Hopefully next time we do a podcast, I'd love to just go through all those guys you've met and just see how they were as people. And
you look, unfortunately, Tommy's not real good. Roberto's 100%. He's mad as a cut snake. Marvin Hagler's in a remarkable condition. Evander Holyfield's good.
Kay went to become a movie star in Italy, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. He's a bit of a star over there. He still looks in great condition. George Foreman, I've interviewed George and I've had dinner with George. He's fabulous, I've never met. I'd love to meet Mike Tyson. He's one guy I would love to meet. And
so would I.
What a machine! What a machine!
Yeah, I would love to as well. So, who do you think is your favourite Australian boxer of all time?
Lionel Rose, without doubt. Johnny Famechon and Lionel Rose were my two idols. More so Lionel because I sort of. I knew Johnny's background. He was French born and a migrant immigrant like me. But to see where Lionel came from, and probably the fact that I became a sparring partner of Lionel when I was about 18. Never sparred Famo. Famo retired by then. The two of them were my main idols, and Muhammad Ali was one of my idols. But Lionel, from an Australian perspective, Lionel Rose, and then Tony Mundine Senior. He was one guy I looked up to a great deal, and unfortunately he never got to win a world title, but he fought Carlos Monzon, one of the greatest fighters in history. But yeah, Lionel Rose was my main idol and probably one of the main catalysts that got me into boxing, to see what he'd achieved and where he'd come from. I thought, well, if he can do it, with the adversity that he's faced, I can do it.
Yeah. I've had such an awesome time with this podcast. As I said before, I'd love to do it again sometime. I think with a guy like you, we can't do it in 1 hour. We kind of need 3, 4, 5 of them and a little series of different.
Well, Jake, I'm happy to do it whenever you want to, mate.
Up for that. So
yeah, for sure.
We keep this one to an hour.
Yep.
And then have a few different ones if you'd be up for that.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you so much, Brad.
Good on you, Jake.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so
been
much
my pleasure. Thank you so much. Thanks to all
guys.
the listeners out there. Thank you.
Awesome. Cheers.